Hello, folks. Welcome once again to the Parenting Today's Teens webinar. My name is Jeff C., and I'll be your host for today's presentation. And once again, I'm here with Mark Gregston. And Mark is the founder and director of Heartlight Ministries, a residential home in Longview, Texas. He's also the host of Parenting Today's Teens, a radio station that is a radio program that is heard across the nation on over 1,500 radio stations. Mark, thanks so much for being here once again.
Hey, you bet, Jeff. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Hey, the upcoming radio show is going to be all about relationship destroyers. Now, kind of tell us what is a relationship destroyer?
I think what happens is that parents forget that maybe they do some things that are not in the best interest of a relationship with their child. Sometimes this is where that scripture that says, fathers, don't provoke your children. Moms, dads, before you look at the speck in somebody else's eye, look at your own log that may be in your eye. And I think the reason that Scripture would tell us, hey, look at and review yourself, is to make sure that we're coming pure into a relationship. But I just think there's some things that we do that kind of push people away. It's those things where we say, Lord, search me, know my heart, see if there's any hurtful way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. But see if there's any hurtful way in me. Am I doing something that I may not even know that I'm doing that may be pushing my child away from me? You've got to go to yourself first.
Gotcha. And we're going to talk. You're going to talk in the radio show about kind of 4 of these relationship destroyers that you kind of talk about. And the first one is the demand for perfection. So, how do parents demand? I mean, I know we want our kids to do well, we want them to succeed in life, and we want them to succeed in school, but what's this demand for perfection that you're mentioning?
Well, I think it's a mentality that most kids have. I would tell parents, do this right now. Text your child and ask them the question, do you want me to be perfect? Just ask them that, and ask them this, do you think that we expect you to be perfect? Start asking some perfection questions, and I think what you'll find is, kids will start to say, what in the world are you talking about? But it helps you convey a message to kids that you don't have to be perfect. Not only do you not have to be perfect, you never will be perfect. And I think what happens in our younger years of working with kids, those ages, 1 through 12, is that we're all on the same page, we're all in the same chapter, we're all presenting a perfect mindset to a child, and then we get to the adolescent years and it looks a little bit different. There's got to be some way that a parent starts engaging with their child and lets their child know, as they begin to understand that they aren't perfect, that it's okay to not be perfect. I think most kids feel like they've been perfect and they look at mom and dad as being perfect, and then they enter into the adolescent years and we find out pretty quick, that's just not the case. Kids aren't perfect. I'm surely not perfect as a parent. And so I want my child to know of that imperfection so that it creates an arena of comfort and one that a child feels that they can be invited to. Here's the thing. I know you're perfect, Jeff.
All right, I try.
No, I know. Nobody likes hanging out with a perfect person. It drives you nuts. And when kids are going through that difficult time, Mom and Dad, get behind this and let them know that you're imperfect. Share that at dinner tonight. Say, the thing I wrestled with when I was 12 years old, when I was 13 years old, when I was 14 years old, and share that. You don't have to give the details. You don't have to tell them all those things that you did wrong. But I think it's important for parents to at least usher in the opportunity to discuss imperfection and to embrace it.
Good. Now, you touched on this a little bit in the upcoming radio show this weekend. How does social media play into the kids' idea of perfection? I mean, I know that they're being bombarded by so many different images, but you mentioned social media is really a thing kids struggle with perfection.
Yeah, you think that everybody's as sexual as they see on porn sites. You think that everybody's as good-looking as Photoshop and Instagram allows you to color pictures different. You think everybody's having just as good a time. When I get on Facebook, it seems like everybody else is on vacations except me. And I go, is really life just perfect for everybody? Did somebody really do like 4,000 push-ups in less than 5 minutes, and their health is great, and they memorize the book of Numbers in Hebrew? I think what happens is we get bombarded with all these images of people telling us all these good things, and we begin to feel like we're not good enough. That we begin to feel like there's something wrong with me, or maybe I'm just not engaged the right way, or I don't have as many friends, or I'm not as good looking as somebody else, or I don't accomplish everything. Yeah, I think that's what's happening with the bombardment of information through social media. It's not real life all the time. You know, not everybody has a great day all the time. I feel like we ought to start sharing with our kids about how miserable we are at times, or I get depressed over these things, or I find that I'm choking when I try to engage with people differently. I've got to let them know that not everything is perfect, because their world is telling them that everything is. Nobody posts a bad picture. Everybody posts a great picture, unless you're ridiculing somebody else. It's always about the stuff that we do great. It's not about the normal everyday life that I think that kids need to I think almost embrace and say, you know what, I'm pretty normal like everybody else.
Well, so how would a parent, and I know it's age appropriate depending on where they're at, you know, how much access we give them to social media, but how does a parent combat all of the stuff that they're seeing online? I mean, what's a good practical way to help them, you know, understand that those are perfect pictures, you know, and they're always having a good time? How can we explain it? How can we help battle that with our kids?
Yeah, you know, great question. And I think a lot of parents are always going, okay, great, Mark, give me the idea behind it. I think what you do is as you begin to allow your child to get involved in social media, you counter that involvement with questions. Do you really think that people are that perfect all the time? Do you really think people go on that many vacations? Do you really think that somebody does that all the time? Why do you think people always want to brag about stuff? Why are people always boasting about some things? Do you think these people really are as happy offline? Do you think this child or this person ever has a bad hair day, or you think their breath stinks? You think that they're a mess sometimes? You think they're just as confused? See what I'm doing?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that all at once to a child, but I may be sitting at the dinner table at night and say, hey, let's just talk here for a minute. You think everybody's as happy as they appear to be on, you know, on Facebook or in Instagram, or you think that? You know, and I think what I'm doing is breaking the pattern, and just saying, if I'm going to allow them to be involved with any kind of social networking, then at the same time, what I'm going to do is counter that with just opportunities to ask some questions, in hopes that it gets them thinking that not all of this is true.
Good. That's good practical advice. Let's go back to our relationship destroyers that you were talking about. The second one you mentioned was parents having a judgmental attitude. So, boy, it's hard not to lecture sometimes.
You know what? I mean, number one's the demand for perfection, and I think in that we move to number two, which is having that judgmental attitude. And that judgmental attitude comes across whenever we hold to standards and we portray biblical principles and morals that we want for our kids. There's nothing wrong with it. You just have to understand as a mom or dad that most kids feel a sense of judgment when you portray that. And they do that because they feel like they're not good enough. And the reason they feel like they're not good enough is because they're being told that over and over and over. So when mom and dad enter into that realm of sharing standards and thoughts and all those things during a child's teen years, if it's interpreted as being judgmental, then a parent will become just like their kids or their friends and their peers who are judgmental. They'll move away from them. Nobody likes to be judged. And so what I do is encourage parents to always say to your kids, hey, I don't want to be judgmental here, but it seems like this is confusing for a lot of people. Hey, I don't mean to be judgmental, but this is concerning to me. I don't mean to be judgmental, but man, I'm wrestling with this. I don't know how to put these two things together. And as I start to show them that I wrestle with some things and I'm having a tough time, then they realize that it's okay for them to wrestle with some things as well, that your child doesn't have to have everything all together. And when they don't, then what happens is I start to engage them differently, and they don't feel like I'm being judgmental. I tell kids all the time, hey, I'm not a judge. I'm a witness. And so I want them to know that I'm here to witness things. I'm not here to judge things. And I don't mean for it to be judgmental. Our kids are so conscious about, I think, super sensitive about engaging with friends, that if you make one negative comment about anybody, especially today, all you have to do is look at the media. You make a negative comment about somebody, you're going to get plastered all over the place because you've stood up and expressed your freedom of speech. And I know that's wrong to be criticized every time you do, but it's almost that we're just in a judgmental time right now, that everybody's being so judgmental. And so our kids are the brunt of the effect of that. And if they are, then we've got to counter that in some way and let them know that you and I, as mom and dad, are not judgmental. I mean, kids hear it all the time that way. We've got to move away from that.
So how would a parent, discipline without being judgmental? Because you want to hold them to a standard, but you also you don't want to. Sometimes it feels like you're always saying no. And I know you say only say no on certain days of the week, but sometimes it just feels like you're in that judgmental rut. And so how do parents discipline in the midst of trying not to come across as judgmental to their kids?
Yeah, I think judgment and enforcing the rules may be two different things. The tendency is for a child to think that you're judging me. Now, if they're younger, you're spanking me. If you're older, you're taking away privileges or opportunities, and so you're being judgmental. I want them to know if I line out the rules of the home and we've all agreed to it, then all I am is the enforcer. This is something that you chose to do and that we agreed to do. And so this is kind of the logical pattern that happens. If you do this inappropriate action, then I'm going to have to take away from something because you and I agreed to that. That keeps me, when I start lining that up, that keeps me from having to be the judge. It's almost like let's predetermine those things beforehand. So I'm not the judge at that time. I'm just the one who's saying, okay, this is how we're going to operate. I'm kind of the catcher in the rye. I'm going to keep you from falling off the edge or falling off the cliff. I'm the guy who's going to make sure that we're following the program. I'm the enforcer. I'm the one who's motivating people to do good things if I've lined all of this out at home. And so I want to stay away from being the judge because I don't want to condemn somebody else. But I think the other way we do it too, Jeff, is not only in our actions when there's discipline that needs to be administered to a child for inappropriate behavior, but I think what it is the way that we talk to our kids and the way we make comments about their friends. Let's say, for example, that your daughter has another friend that doesn't dress too modestly. When we make comments about that other friend, it's coming across as judgmental. Sometimes it's better just to leave it alone. Sometimes it's better just to ask questions. Sometimes it's better to not feel like that this child is a complete mess. They just may not have the guidance. So how do I guide my child and talk to them? And that happens more when I spend time in discussion rather than lecture. You've got to move away from that in the teen years. Move more into discussion. Get away from the lecture because the lecture feels like you're teaching, you're imparting information, and you're being judgmental. Remember, the Christian life is more caught than taught. So how you act when your child is in their adolescent years makes all the difference in the world, because if you continue to just impart information, you're gonna come across as being judgmental.
I guess the key that you had mentioned, not to discipline and not be judgmental, is to set up everything beforehand, not during conflict. It be the enforcer, but already have that established. I think that is the key.
Yeah, that's like looking for candles or feeling like you have a need for candles when your electricity goes out. You ought to have the candles there already, so that when something happens, you can engage differently, and you're prepared for it, so that you're not frantic, you're not in a rush, you're not scared to death, and you're not walking around in the dark. If the electricity goes out, light a candle, and it's easy. Then you go, okay, hey, this is kind of cool. It's the same way with the discipline. Have the stuff all lined out beforehand, so there's no question about what the action that needs to be taken. It keeps you from jumping into that role of having to be judgmental.
Good. Okay, number 3, of the relationship destroyers is the need for control. I think all parents, tend to probably over control than going the other direction.
Yeah, you think just a little bit. I think that's our tendency as a mom and dad. I mean, every mom and dad, a good mom and dad, like to control things. You like to be the ones that are saying, do this, do this, do this, act this way, be this way, engage this way, talk this way. You do that in the earlier years because you're teaching them, how to engage. Well, during their adolescent years, you got to let go of some stuff and let them pick it up. Because when they start to pick it up, then they begin to realize, hey, this is about me. I've got to engage differently. And I think what happens is when we try to control them, then we become that person that's just imparting more and more information to them, and they feel like they're bombarded, and they just start moving away because they feel the judgment. They feel like, you want me to be perfect all the time. I can't do this. You've got to give up some control. I remember Chuck Swindoll writing a book once called Loosen Your Grip. And somewhere it's saying, I'm going to loose my grip so that my child can start experimenting and figuring out what they believe in and what they hold to be true, and I'm going to let them experiment. It doesn't always have to be the best way that they do things. The issue becomes that they do it their way. And it may not be the best, but it may be okay, and I've got to be okay with that as a parent, to let them make some decisions, to let them fall, to just stop having so much control of them so that they feel like they're not ever going to become independent. They're not ever going to be able to make decisions on their own. They're not ever going to be able to pick out their clothes. They're not ever going to be, as a 12-year-old, yes, you have some control. You go, these are the clothes you need to wear. But a 17-year-old, we're still telling them that. This is where you go as a 12-year-old on websites. This is where you don't go. As an 18-year-old, we're still doing that. Now, the point isn't, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord, and you're not going to do certain things, and you're going to look a certain way, and you're going to act. The issue here is that I need to teach my child about discernment and move them to a place where they can start making decisions. Let them flex their decision-making muscle so that they can handle the bigger issues that they're going to have to make decisions about in the days ahead.
It's interesting you mentioned on the upcoming show is, we have this need for control, but we also tend to farm out our kids' spirituality. We try to, we drop them off the church and we say, let's have the church do that. And you mentioned before, Christianity is, caught rather than taught. And so, can you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, you know what? I think that a lot of the true application and the impartation of wisdom doesn't happen from a youth minister or a pastor. It happens from mom or dad. And I say that because wisdom, which are the principles of right living, are transferred by observation, reflection, and experience. And there's just some things that a child will observe with a mom or dad that becomes so important for them to see. You get to see the teaching played out during the adolescent years, and that which they reflect on. You can be a controlling, perfectionistic, authoritative father and never ask your kids questions, and they'll never know how to engage any differently with people other than to answer and give them the right answer and just one-word answers. If you start asking questions and engaging them differently, I think what happens is they begin to embrace things differently. And so, true, I think a child wants to almost move in another direction, but we've got to give them the opportunity to make those moves and do it in such a way that they feel like they're valued in the process. And so some of that is just saying, hey, we got to let go.
Good. All right, the last relationship destroyer we're going to talk about is the constant negativity. Now, and that kind of ties into the issues of, what we've talked about before, but I've been around some parents that it seems like all they're doing is harping on their kids all the time, and you can just see the kid wilt inside, and I just kind of think, okay, it's coming. The rebellion's coming.
No, I agree. I think it's either wilting or they're seething inside. You know, moms do this. I think moms do this to their sons a lot. And I don't know why. I think there's a special relationship that moms and sons have. That's why Scripture says, you know, a man shall leave his mother and a woman leave her home, her dad. You know, there's something special. But I think moms want something special for their sons. They want them to be a good man. They want them to be a better man than their husband, which isn't a bad thing. That's a good thing. But I think what they do is then they constantly correct. They constantly challenge. They constantly say, you could do it better, you can do it different, and you can do it a different way next time you do it. And what that does to a young man is make him feel like he's not a man. Feel like he's still a little boy. You know, somewhere moms are missing the opportunity to engage with their sons differently that allows their son to grow up into the man that they want to be. I want sons to marry somebody just like mom. I don't want them to marry somebody else because of mom. I don't want mom to push them away. And dads do this with their daughters also. Dads have a tendency to demand more perfection out of their daughter. So when they do, they're constantly negative about what they're doing. Now, you're never going to get married that way. You can't dress that way. You can't act like that. You can't say that on faith. You can't always be correcting kids all the time. Look, I live with 60 high school kids. If I was correcting them all the time, I would never have any time to spend in relationship with them, because kids change because of relationship, and they move in a different direction because of a relationship. It's not because of my constant correction. What I forget to realize is that perhaps my correction is belittling them and shaming them because they're not perfect yet. But it's also positioning me to be the one that knows everything. And you know, it's like the scripture that says, the way of the fool appears right to him. And I go, if everything's always right to a mom or right to a dad, let me tell you, it will move you to foolishness. And that's why when we talk about all these different relationship things, that these relationship destroyers, it's a package deal. It's not just one thing that you can work on. It's all of them. You gotta piece it together, because if you're constantly negative, then you do have a demand for perfection. And if you have a demand for perfection, then you're always going to be judgmental. And if you're judgmental, you're always going to be in control. And if you're always in control, then you're always going to be negative. And then if you're negative, you're always going to be judgmental. It fuels off of one another. And so somewhere along the line, moms and dads have got to say, okay, this is a package thing. I've got to quit doing all these things. And the best way to do it is to ask your kids tonight, do you think I'm a negative person? Do you think I have a need for control? Do you think I have a judgmental attitude? Do you think I want you to be perfect? You can start right there, and you'd be surprised how kids would respond to it. And there's your jumping off point. There's your springboard to have those discussions that your kids are desperately wanting to have with you.
I think one of the things when you ask those questions, don't be ready for to jump back with a response, but just, you know, acknowledge it, and, you know, don't jump right back into lecturing after you've asked these questions and you want to get a response, because you're trying to enter with a relationship and these discussions that you've talked about. One of the things you mentioned quite a bit is you talk about being a student of your kids, and I think one of the only ways you can do that is to ask these questions.
I think so. You know, I think what we do is get the idea that we know it all, and especially as parents. And I'm going to reach in the dark as I'm sitting here, because I got to show you something that I was with a man, and he made a comment to me, and I thought it was unbelievable. But this was his comment. He said, Mark, he's an 80-year-old guy, and he said he's an 80-year-old guy, and he goes, you know how parents can change the way they engage with their kids if they would just listen. Can you see that? Mm-hmm. It's Chuck Swindoll. And Chuck and I did a radio program together, and I sat there, and I know how I am with this fellow right here. I consider him a hero. And I looked at somebody that's a little bit older. Now, I've got grandkids. I've got my own kids. But when I was a parent, it was hard for me to understand what I was doing wrong. And so somebody's coming alongside. It was Chuck for me, growing up. I listened to him. I hope that people are listening to this, because I'm not just making up stuff. But it is interesting to me that the older people that I'm around begin to say the same thing. If we would be a student of our kids and we would just listen, we would change the direction of their life, and it might even change us in the process.
Very good point. Well, before we wrap up the show, I want to get to a question that somebody asked us in the comments today. Crystal asks, my ex-husband does not communicate with me about our son. As a matter of fact, he tells our son that he can't stand me. My son is 16, and he seems angry a lot and hard to communicate with. I love him so much, and I feel very hopeless.
Yeah.
What advice would you give Crystal?
Yeah, you know what, Crystal, here, a good answer that I hope that helps somewhere is that, one, I don't think any situation is hopeless, because the thing is, your child, you continue to love him, he's going to grow up and realize what's really going on. It may be a little bump in the road right now, but he'll get to a point where he understands, hey, Dad's been bashing my mom. That may be what's making him angry, is that he has a dad that he loves, he's supposed to love, that's bashing his mother, who has a special relationship. And you know what? This ushers in what we talked about, these relationship destroyers. Perhaps what you say to your son is, you know what? I'm not perfect, and I want to tell you that. I'm not perfect. And make sure that you don't bash him back. If you do, then you're being constantly negative. It may mean that I have this need for control, or you're being judgmental, or it's in the tough things that we go through that I think we destroy relationships. It's not when everything's good. It's when we go through tough times. And so going through this with your son, hold true to what you know to be right. Keep doing that. Don't be judgmental. Don't be negative. Always be affirming. But admit those things where you say, I'm not perfect. Matter of fact, nobody's perfect. And you know that your dad and I had a tough time, and we just felt it was better that we're not together. And you kind of leave it at that. Your son will grow out of his anger as you embrace him more and more, and grow into love with you if you make sure that you hold yourself to be blameless and don't do the same thing to your husband that your husband's doing to you.
Thanks, Mark. That's good advice. And anybody else who has questions, feel free to enter them in the comment stream, and we'll try to get to them as quick as we can. That's our time for today. I really appreciate everybody who came and watched the program and are watching us later on YouTube. For any more information and to sign up for our newsletter, to get even more resources, make sure you visit www.parentingtodaysteens.org. That's www.parentingtodaysteens.org. Thanks so much for coming and spending time with us, and we look forward to coming and discussing even more parenting next time on the Parenting Today's Teens webinar. Thanks so much. See you guys later.